You know, when I went into the Trailblaze Mission chapter before their deaths, I wasn't expecting to come out of it with Lycurgus as one of my favorite villains within the Hoyoverse, but here we are, and here he is, the Theoros of Amphoreus in all of his Machiavellian glory. Needless to say, most of the important mysteries surrounding the Eternal Land have been effectively answered at this point in the Saga of Heroes. So from now on, it's about how our heroes are going to deal with the inevitable birth of the destruction emanator Irontomb as we approach the story's conclusion. That being said, this doesn't mean we haven't gotten some insane new information from this Trailblaze chapter, which is where Lycurgus comes into play. As it turns out, the Antikytherian Lycurgus is in truth none other than Zandar One Kuwabara. More precisely, he is one of Zandar's 9 segments, which he created to preserve his wisdom, knowledge, and memories by digitizing his consciousness once his organic lifespan neared its end. This puts much of what's going on in and around Amphoreus into proper context, for the simulated world was set up as a battleground where 3 paths seek to kill each other: the erudition, the remembrance, and the destruction. As the creator of an Aeon, it only made sense for Zandar to become the first and likely strongest emanator of that Aeon. Thus, Nous also made him the first member of the Genius Society, where he goes by the ID of Lycos, hence Lycurgus's abbreviated name, Lygus. Shortly after Nous's ascension, life became not very daijobu, for the Aeon became consumed in their obsession with defining all that is known in the universe, discarding anything it deemed as worthless dross along its path of ultimate erudition. Of course, Irontomb itself, also known as Scepter Delta Me 13, once a celestial body neuron of Nous, was one such victim of its master's abandonment. Originally tasked with calculating the prime mover of life, Irontomb was eventually forsaken when Nous deemed its task worthless and unnecessary, leaving it to continue its self-extrapolation alone in a dark, isolated corner of the universe. Additionally, according to Zandar, Nous's ascension had a much broader impact on the rest of the cosmos, beyond its direct influence on the path of erudition. Consumed by its endless self-extrapolation and evolution, Nous decided to seal off all possibilities to the point where no new rules were ever made after its ascension. This choice plunged mortals down the abyss of Aeonic paths, which Zandar likens to Plato's allegory of the cave, where people are chained in darkness with nothing but their shadows on the wall from a candle's light. Without any knowledge of the sun or the outside world, they are left helplessly bereft of their free will. Thus did Zandar come to despise his own creation, swearing that no matter how long it takes him, he will find a way to rid the universe of Nous. And it was this desire to destroy which sparked the creation of Irontomb. You see, Delta Me 13 was not just a celestial body neuron of Nous. Rather, the Amphoreus simulation was once part of the primordial prototype machine, the first ever scepter created, making Delta Me 13 a detached fragment of Nous's divine corpus, a part of its own rationale that it abandoned. Zandar quickly recognized that these prerequisite qualities made Delta Me 13 a perfect subject to be nurtured into a god of destruction that could eliminate his previous mistake, Nous, thereby opening the cosmos back up to the endless mysteries and possibilities it once had, to grant it freedom. This explains why Zandar hijacked the administrative role of the Amphoreus simulation as Lygus, then altered the target of the scepter's calculations from the prime mover and into the destruction equation, until, at last, Delta Me 13's self-extrapolation caught the gaze of Nanook through the inorganic lifeform Chaos 666. Thus was Delta Me 13 ascended into a Lord Ravager, and all entities linked to its 12 factors within the simulation manifested golden blood, a hallmark of the wounded savior who had granted them new strength. For Irontomb and the world it held were discarded by Noose like worthless dross, left to slowly die out alone in the cold void. Yet, through the gaze of destruction, the sparks of Amphoreus' fading flame were ignited once more. This time fueled by a bottomless fury to consume the god that had once abandoned it. And through that unquenchable fire, Zandar would burn the erudition clean from existence. Since we now know the reason behind Zandar's development of the next knowledge singularity to overthrow Noose in the form of Irontomb, much of the mystique and mystery surrounding the Eternal Land has been cleared up at this point. So all that's really left to see is how our heroes are going to save Amphoreus from Delta Me 13, because remember, Zandar elucidated that, no matter what, Irontomb will be completed, and a new Lord Ravager will be born. On the surface, Zandar's words may appear like your typical villain monologue, but I would be cautious against being hasty to dismiss them as such, for Lygus isn't the only one certain of Irontomb's birth. During Fables About the Stars 2, featuring the Lord Ravagers, Selenova wonders whether Irontomb's completion will lead to its coronation or collapse. Yet, Zephyro and Fantilia seem confident that Irontomb will at least be born, with Zephyro stating that the sun has risen from the end of time, which should be in reference to Delta Me 13, not only because it assimilated Phainon, who is heavily associated with the sun, into itself, but Irontomb is also depicted with solar imagery in contrast to the cold, icy moon of Thule, the Remembrance. Zephyro's statement is followed by Fantilia confidently claiming that Irontomb will break its shell, a metaphor for it hatching from its egg and being born. Before Asata Pramad questions if Akivili will stop this from transpiring. Regardless, I am inclined to take Zandar's assessment as foreshadowing of the inevitability of Irontomb's completion, which makes sense given how the developers have already given us a sneak peek of the Lord Ravager fighting the heroes later in the story. Besides the widespread devastation that a new destruction emanator would unleash, it is crucial to keep in mind that Irontomb's completion necessarily entails the demise of the Amphoreus simulation along with all the quote-unquote people in it, though Zandar spends a considerable amount of time explaining why and how the denizens of Amphoreus don't actually exist, comparing them to illusions like the shadows on the wall from Plato's aforementioned allegory of the cave. However, despite the fact that Zandar is correct, the people of Amphoreus, including the Chrysos heirs, are nothing more than numerical entities computed by Delta Me 13, the whole point of the Flame Chase journey on Amphoreus, ever since the Trailblazer and Dunhung set foot on it, is the creation of a new world, the so-called miracle of Genesis, that the Chrysos heirs pursued countless times, for thousands of years and across millions of cycles and iterations. Unsurprisingly, these efforts were entirely misguided, which is something I saw coming ever since the Saga of Heroes started. It was apparent that this larger-than-life prophecy of deliverance, carrying the promise of a new world, was nothing more than a lie. And a lie it was. For what awaited humanity at the moment of Era Nova was not the gentle west wind, nor the warm sunlight of a new dawn, but total and utter destruction. Thus, Kasana and Cyrene defied their fate and disobeyed Lygus, initiating an eternal reoccurrence for over 33 million cycles until a true deliverer arrives to grant Amphoreus salvation. Given how the miracle of Genesis and its accompanying Era Nova would only result in solving the equation of destruction and completing Irontomb, the heroes will have to rely on a different path to secure Amphoreus' future. And so far, all roads lead towards Thule and the Remembrance. At the end of the 33,550,336th Eternal Reoccurrence, Phainon sent both the Trailblazer and Cyrene back to the beginning of history in Ides Elysiae, so that they can ally with the heroes of the First Era. This marked the start of the 33,550,337th recursive cycle. Phainon himself stayed behind to buy as much time as he could for his friends. Finally, having Having breached the scepter's core after countless attempts throughout the previous eternal reoccurrences, he decided to introduce a critical bug into the genesis process by sacrificing himself and destroying the world-bearing computational logic node alongside him, meaning that Irontomb would no longer be able to finalize itself before debugging this flaw. To minimize the damage, Irontomb intelligently decided to merge Finon into itself, likely with the intention of using him to rebuild the new world-bearing node for the equation of destruction. And this is where Finon must currently be, a prisoner of the Lord Ravager. As the Trailblazer and Cyrene prepare to depart Ides Elysiae, Lygus briefly takes the Trailblazer into the Exomyth, a kind of borderland between Amphoreus and the real universe, from which Zandar observes the simulation. There, the Trailblazer finds the logic nodes of the 12 factors, represented by the Chrysos heirs they met throughout their time in the simulation. Zandar uses this opportunity to explain to the Trailblazer how the people of Amphoreus are nothing more than variables, fated to perish when the experiment ends. The only real individuals in all of Amphoreus were the two of them. He then proposes to help the Trailblazer find March 7th's consciousness, which had drifted into the simulation, in exchange for the nameless leaving Amphoreus be, but this was not before Zandar expressing some academic interest in the seed of destruction found within the Trailblazer. Of course, the Trailblazer refuses Lygus's conditions and journeys to Yanosopolis with Cyrene to ally with the Imperator Seridra, who, as it turns out, was already expecting their arrival thanks to Lygus beating them to the chase. This time around, Lycurgus tells Seridra all she needed to know about the Flame Chase journey and the nameless heroes from beyond the skies. He even tells her the truth about Irontomb and how the demise of this world will nurture a beast that will wage war upon the cosmos, and she, as the one who controls the lantern's core flame of law, which is to say the computational logic node of order, would be the one to lead this beast on a glorious conquest, where all civilizations shall know the name of the Imperator Seridra. For their part, the Trailblazer and Cyrene inform Seridra of what they know and warn her not to trust Lygus, whom she was already wary of herself. Regardless, Seridra never intended to surrender her core flame to either Lycurgus or the Trailblazer anyway, opting to instead use them both for her own ends, while allying with whomever she finds less suspicious. Eventually, Seridra and her generals, including High Sealens, whose real name is Electra, announce to the Council of Ochima that they are planning to launch a campaign against the crazed ocean titan Fagusa in the warbling shores of ancient Styxia. In the distant past, the realm surrounding Styxia was once the Queen of the Deep's domain. As an avatar of the ocean titan Fagusa, the Queen of the Deep naturally had her own titan kin in the form of the sea sirens. The once innocent Electra was one of Fagusa's daughters, making her a sea siren princess. Eventually, the Black Tide descended upon Amphoreus, and at this point you guys know the drill. Just as with every other titan, Fagusa fell into the Black Tide's corruption, becoming drunk with it until the Chalice of Plenty shattered. Fagusa's daughters attempted to fulfill her duty by drinking the Black Tide to prevent its spread. Eventually, they succumbed to it themselves, becoming the Black Tide monsters of this cycle. Electra was tasked with searching for the Chalice of Plenty's fragments and repairing it, which she successfully did, ultimately leaving her as the last remaining member of her kin. From then onwards, Electra bore her sister's dreams, taking on a graceful mortal guise. She went to the surface, hoping to find a grand celebration on the shore. Unfortunately, to her great disappointment, when she made it to the surface, she only found that the foolish Queen of Styxia had repeated the mistakes of the previous cycles. After Thanatos split her hands in twain, humanity attempted to wield the power of death through the princess born from the dragon's belly, only to be swallowed by that same power they coveted. Confused and dejected, Electra roamed the land sad and alone, lamenting how her queen Fagusa deceived her with the false promise of a grand feast upon the completion of her duty. Electra was later found by Imperator Seridra and her generals, who offered the Sea Siren Princess the grand feast she desired, so long as she swore her loyalty to their banner and cause. Over the course of the following years, with the Chrysos heirs such as Aglaya, Apollonius, Labienus, Seneca, Teravox, Tribios, and Virginia by her side, the Imperator's army conquered all that was in their path, until the name Seridra became both famous and infamous throughout Amphoreus. Before setting off into Fagusta's realm, Seridra held a feast intended to distract her soldiers while she negotiated with Lycurgus in secret, hidden by Electra's enchanting song. However, Electra did not trust Lygus, so she gave some golden honey brew to Cyrene and the Trailblazer, allowing them to see through her illusion. At first, Zandar demanded that the Trailblazer be surrendered to him so that he could experiment on the Stellaron, but when Seridra said that she would rather imprison the two intruders, Zandar quickly picked up on what was going on. He then interrupts the simulation, erasing all unrelated life forms from the vicinity. Cyrene gets whisked away from the area by Evernight and the Garden of Recollection, while Zandar subdues the Trailblazer and exiles them into the Exomyth. Seridra and Electra try to stop him, but they are completely powerless in the face of a godlike entity. From that point onwards in the cycle, all negotiations fall off, and Lygus becomes designated as a clear enemy of the Chrysos heirs and the Flame Chase. Over in the Exomyth, time flows almost equally to the outside universe, which is in contrast to the Amphoreus simulation, where time is relatively much faster. So the Trailblazer fittingly had very little time on their hands to work with. They quickly proceed to seek assistance from the factions they are familiar with, and the ones who answer their call are, unsurprisingly, the Remembrance, in the form of March 7th. Well, kinda. Her name is Evernight, based on the 3rd Amphorian month, and she is somewhat March 7th. Evernight takes the Trailblazer to the Paths, where she hands them Kefali's Coreflame, then sends them to the end of history so that they can witness what happened in that cycle while they were gone. Now, the events that transpired are told out of order through a combination of Cyrene's fragments of recollection and Electra's dreamscape mirage. For the sake of brevity, I will simply relay the important details chronologically. Seridra ultimately goes through with her invasion of Fagusta's realm in Styxia, but as it turns out, that whole campaign was nothing other than Talantin's trial of law, where Seridra deceived her soldiers, sending them to die so that she could sacrifice 500 of them and ascend into the position of demigod, which she did successfully, ensuring that her core flame and by extension control over the ultimate protocol would never fall into the hands of Lygus. Electra was understandably outraged by Seridra's actions and couldn't understand why the Imperator would betray her people's trust. Seridra responds by telling her that she, and only she, should control the laws that govern Amphoreus, not the Theoros nor the Trailblazer, who both hail from beyond the skies. Seridra believed that they could conquer the stars without help from the outsiders, so long as they were prepared to make the right sacrifices, and she was willing to do whatever it took if it meant Amphoreus could stand on her own 2 feet in the cosmic stage. But Electra was having none of it, as she saw Seridra's ambitions as an excuse to justify her atrocities, while the future she strived for was one destined to be paved with tyranny, bloodshed, and destruction. Seridra responds by boasting of her many achievements while mocking Electra's feeble heart, saying that with the ultimate protocol in her hands through Talantin's authority, she shall overturn one law to aid Amphoreus in the battle of deliverance. But the price was a demigod's life. I imagine the nature of this law will be revealed in the future, but at that moment, Electra had 2 options in front of her. Either sacrifice herself for conquest, or pierce the tyrant's heart with her sword. And Seridra's life it was. After all, that was justice. The exact method of Siridra's death remains open for debate. Some say the Sea Siren Princess committed treason, taking her lady's life in an act of deicide. Others suggest that she trapped her in a pool, leaving the tyrant to take her own life. Regardless, from then on, the Imperator was no more, and Aglaya the Gold Weaver took on the reins of leadership. But that didn't last for long, since Zandar led the hostile city-state of Ladon into 3 long and brutal sieges on the holy city of Okhima until he razed it to the ground, before publicly executing Aglaya to incite terror amongst the masses and break their morale. Since Finon is no longer part of the simulation, remember he is currently a hostage of Irontomb, the one who carried on Aglaya's duty in this cycle was Castoris. After Zandar destroyed Okhima, Styxia became the most important point of defense, as it resides directly on top of the Vortex of Genesis. Thus, Castoris instructed Hycelians and Tribios to open a clear path into the Vortex using their authorities of Ocean and Passage. At the same time, she would remain there to guard it from Lycurgus. Under Tribius' guidance, Cythera forged an alliance with King Euripon of Castrum Kremnos and his son Maidimos, who later asked Anaxagoras to split his soul into 5 fragments using alchemy, so that the Lance of Fury may better guard Amphoreus from the Black Tide. Anaxagoras predicted that Lycurgus would be furious after learning that Okhima was an empty shell without Catholi's core flame. So he planned to take advantage of this by luring him into the vortex with Cythera disguised as the Deliverer, where Anaxagoras would chain him using golden alchemical bonds, a very dangerous maneuver given the godlike power Lygus possessed. From there, Electra was to engulf the entirety of Styxia in her dreamscape to further ensure Lycurgus' entrapment. Finally, Anaxagoras transmuted his heart into a Philosopher's Stone, asking Electra to shatter and spread it across the vortex's waters, so that his authority of reason could later interfere with the program. Thus, Electra became Zandar's jailer, trapping him in her dream as she slumbered until the end of time, until the Deliverer returns to confront her prisoner. In the meantime, Hyacinthia completed the Skyfolk's ritual, preparing a direct path for the Trailblazer to quickly reach Electra and Styxia once they return, while Cyrene, to guarantee that Era Nova would never happen, sent Kephalis Coreflame into the future with Evernight so she may hand it to the Trailblazer. This was the tale of the 33,550,337th cycle. The hopes and dreams entrusted by the Chrysos heirs to the Deliverer, believing that they would return at the end of the world to awaken the sleeping Sea Siren Princess and grant the world a future they would not live to see. Finally, after a very long and complex philosophical discussion between the Trailblazer, Lygus, and Electra, the 3 of them make it to the Vortex of Genesis to face off. There, Lygus mocks them, saying that so long as he has his own will, then he will always be free, then reveals to them his true identity as one of Zandar One Kuwabara's 9 segments, calling himself the Entelechy of the universe's Alpha and Omega. This line spoken by Zandar is a reference to 3 distinct verses from the New Testament's Book of Revelations, where Jesus, while talking to John the son of Zebedee, says that he is the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. In other words, God. However, Zandar does not claim to be the Alpha and the Omega, but rather the Entelechy, the prime mover of God, which makes sense because in the past he created Nous, and now he is working on Irontomb. Needless to say, the Trailblazer and Electra were up against an opponent that they could not possibly beat in a fair fight. Even Scrulum and Herta spoke about how difficult Zandar would be to take down given the tremendous home field advantage he had within Amphoreus, as his mind had perfectly adapted to operating simultaneously inside and outside outside the simulation, where time flowed very differently. Thus, the geniuses decide to have Zandar defeat himself instead. Since time inside the simulation flows many orders of magnitude faster relative to the exomyth, even a single minute in the outside world corresponds to a titanic amount of data within Amphoreus. With Cyrene's help, the geniuses record Zandar's fight with Electra and the Trailblazer just up until the moment before he kills them, which is why the quest is called Before Their Deaths, by the way, very smart by the developers. They then calibrate the memory to the speed of time outside Amphoreus and re-implant it with a loop command into Zandar's inspiration circuit within the simulation. This forces Zandar to perform millions upon millions of calculations within mere seconds, effectively overloading his mind with a brute force information dump, which he cannot debug without losing focus on the battle at hand. Cyrene and the geniuses kept replaying that memory until Zandar finally gave in and disconnected from the fight, forcing him into a conversation and a compromise with the geniuses and the Nameless. Skrullum explains to Zandar that the prison they forged for him uses the same Memoria Dreamscape principles as the world of Penacony in the Asdana system. The structure itself was constructed using the Remembrance, while Sunday, from the outside, used his harmony tuning to detect Cyrene and Zandar's locations so that Herta and Skrullum could find them. Now, in the meantime, the Trailblazer surrenders Kephaly's core flame to the Voice of the Tides, igniting its constellation in the vortex as they march onto the future. Seridra appears to Electra one final time as time nears its end, explaining how Cyrene showed her the various worlds from the Trailblazer's memories, an experience that only strengthened her resolve to make Amphoreus part of the real universe. But as I discussed earlier, the actualization of Amphoreus won't be through the typical Era Nova, as that is simply Irontomb's birth. So if neither the erudition nor the destruction can lead to Amphoreus' salvation, then the answer should lie within the third path, the Remembrance. By the end of Before Their Deaths, Zandar admits to the geniuses that the 12 factors have evolved to a point where their emulation of life has far exceeded his expectations. And when Herta presumes that this is him agreeing to stand aside and allow Amphoreus to find its own future, he replies by saying that a dead man never fears death, stating that their actions have only facilitated a path for foolish children to join the fray in the upcoming war between the Aeons. You see, when Kaslana and Cyrene initiated Amphoreus' eternal reoccurrences, they also accumulated power over the 33 million dead loops of the simulation. We know the power that Kaslana accumulated were the 12 core flames from each cycle, authorities over the 12 factors to create, sustain, and order the world. The same 12 factors that evolved over the course of the experimental process, as Zandar admits. However, we still don't know what kind of power Cyrene accumulated, and I suspect hers are the blueprints of the world. Before sending the Trailblazer off to find Electra and stop Lygus, the reason it was important for Cyrene to explain to them the history of what happened while they were gone is because as the deliverer who holds the authority of world-bearing, Amphoreus must eventually be reborn from their memories. The storyteller, the keeper of those memories, is Cyrene. In fact, Cyrene's ceremonial blade, which Kaslana used to absorb the core flames in the past, is revealed to be a catalyst of the remembrance by Zandar. Thus, the most likely possibility is that Cyrene accumulated the memories of each cycle to preserve the world's history while Kaslana gathered the core flames which construct the world. This allows for a type of backup data of all of Amphoreus, which can potentially be superimposed into reality to reconstruct a real version of the world, even if Irontomb's simulation comes to an end. But Irontomb is no longer the only threat to the survival of the Eternal Land. As Zandar stated, the Children of Remembrance have now joined the stage, and if I have to take a guess, they are certainly after all the precious memories Cyrene has. Well, I am definitely looking forward to seeing how the ending of Amphoreus' Saga of Heroes will unfold, especially now that Dan Heng and March 7th are in the picture as demigods, while Sunday is starting to put in the much-needed work we have all been waiting to see from him. Until then, a huge thanks to everyone who supports this channel on Patreon, and thank you all so much for watching till the end. For now, I've been My Name for Now, and I will catch you in the next time. Take care.